Diego Garcia, a single dad to 8-year-old Sofia, was enjoying a quiet dinner at a Madrid restaurant when his life changed forever. At the next table, two men were harassing a blonde woman who was desperately trying to shake off their unwanted attention. Little Sofia, watching the scene, whispered innocently, "Daddy, can we help her?" Diego, a former Spanish army soldier, didn't hesitate. He stood up and confronted the two aggressors, putting all his training to use to defend the stranger. The fight was short but intense, and when it was over, the woman thanked him with tears in her eyes before vanishing into the Madrid night. What Diego didn't know was that he had just saved the wrong person at the exact right moment. The next day, a black Mercedes pulled up outside his house. Men in sharp suits knocked on his door with serious expressions. Who was that woman really, and why were Diego and his daughter now in mortal danger? Diego Garcia had always believed that father-daughter nights were sacred. Ever since he'd won full custody of Sofia after the divorce, he took her out to dinner every Friday. It had become their cherished ritual, a time to talk without distractions. That October evening, they'd chosen Casa Lucio, a cozy family restaurant in the La Latina neighborhood that Sofia loved for its famous broken eggs. Diego watched her eat with enthusiasm as she told him about the school play where she'd be a sunflower. At 35, he'd learned that these moments were worth more than any career success as a civil engineer. The place was packed with the usual Friday crowd, Madrid families, tourists, young couples. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of garlic and paprika mingling with lively chatter. But as Sofia described the costume her grandma was making, Diego noticed something disturbing at the neighboring table. A blonde woman in her 30s was sitting alone, but two men in their 40s had joined her uninvited. She was clearly uncomfortable, trying to pull away from their invasive hands. The men were the type Diego had learned to spot during his army years, aggressive, used to taking what they wanted without asking. The heavier one, sporting a flashy gold chain, placed a hand on her shoulder when she tried to stand, forcing her to stay seated. The thinner one, with cold eyes, moved his chair to block her exit. She shook her head firmly, but they kept invading her space, laughing at jokes that clearly weren't amusing her. Sofia, with a child's sharp perception, had noticed too. She turned to her father with those big green eyes she'd inherited from her mother. "Daddy, that lady looks scared. Can we help her?" In that instant, the protective instinct Diego had honed during his military service in Afghanistan kicked in like a switch. He'd seen too many times what happened when people looked the other way. Diego stood slowly, jaw tight. His training allowed him to assess the situation fast, two likely untrained men underestimating the risk of a public confrontation. He approached their table with measured steps and intervened politely but firmly, suggesting the man leave the lady alone. The heavier one, with a scar on his left cheek, responded with sarcasm and aggression. When Diego didn't back down, the second man stood and threatened him, mentioning Sofia in a way that flipped a switch in the father. Things escalated quickly. The heavy guy shoved Diego in the chest, a fatal mistake. Military training took over instinctively. Diego deflected the shove, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted it in one fluid motion that dropped him to his knees. The second tried to hit him from behind, but Diego blocked it with a neck hold that stopped him cold. The restaurant fell completely silent. Diego, still in control, told the men to wait 5 minutes before moving while the woman left. Both nodded frantically. She quickly grabbed her Hermes bag and headed for the exit. Before disappearing into the Madrid night, she turned to Diego with a look of gratitude mixed with something else he couldn't read, like she was memorizing his face. Diego returned to his table, where Sofia waited with wide-eyed admiration, whispering excitedly that he'd saved the lady like a superhero. He smiled, ruffled her hair, and explained he wasn't a superhero, just a dad who couldn't stand seeing someone in trouble. What Diego didn't know was that he'd saved the wrong woman at the perfect moment, and that the next day, his quiet life as a single father would be turned upside down forever. Saturday morning started with the comforting domestic routine Diego had come to treasure. He made pancakes for Sofia while she watched cartoons in her pajamas. It was one of those peaceful moments that made their life together so precious after the chaos of the divorce. Around 10, as Sophia worked on homework and he checked work emails, the doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone, maybe the mailman or the neighbor who often borrowed things. When he opened the door, 3 men in elegant dark suits stood there. They had the air of people who handled serious business, but something in their eyes put Diego on instant alert, the way they positioned themselves to block any escape. The man in the middle, about 50 with perfectly groomed gray hair and an expensive watch, smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. They introduced themselves as people interested in discussing what had happened the night before. From the kitchen came Sophia's voice asking who it was. Diego turned instinctively, and in that moment of distraction, the youngest man placed a hand on his shoulder, not threatening, but the message was clear. The gray-haired man suggested they talk privately, for his daughter's sake. Diego assessed quickly, 3 trained men, likely armed, with Sophia inside. He couldn't risk escalation. He stepped out to the backyard, followed by the 3. Once out of sight from the windows, the man dropped all pretense of politeness. He explained that the woman from the night before was Elena Ruiz, daughter of Victor Ruiz, one of the most powerful men in southern Spain, a man who valued his family's privacy above all. Diego felt his blood run cold. He'd heard that name in the papers. Victor Ruiz was a businessman with connections far beyond the legal world, thriving in the gray area between legitimate and illicit dealings. The problem, the man continued, was that the 2 harassers worked for people unhappy with Mr. Ruiz. They were sending a message, and Diego had ruined it. The request was simple. Diego and Sofia needed to disappear for a while, a long vacation far from Madrid. When Diego asked what would happen if he refused, the younger man opened his jacket just enough to reveal a holstered gun. The threat became more specific when they mentioned Sofia's school and dance classes, showing they knew their routines perfectly. Diego realized he was cornered, he couldn't put Sofia at risk. The gray-haired man said Mr. Ruiz was generous to those who helped him. Tickets to Ibiza were ready, expenses covered. They had to leave the next morning. After the men left, Diego stood in the yard watching autumn leaves fall from the old plane tree. His quiet life had just ended, all for doing the right thing. He went back inside, where Sofia had finished her homework and greeted him with a beaming smile, asking if they could go to the park. He hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar strawberry scent of her shampoo, then suggested a surprise vacation to the Balearic Islands. Sofia's eyes lit up with joy, and Diego felt his heart break. He didn't know when, or if, they'd ever come home. The flight to Ibiza left at 8 a.m. from Barajas. Diego had framed it as a special surprise to celebrate Sofia's good grades. She reacted with the excitement only an 8-year-old can muster, already dreaming of beaches, ice cream, and adventures. During the flight, as Sofia slept against the window, Diego replayed the last 24 hours. He'd called in a family emergency to his boss, cancelled appointments, and packed while keeping everything normal. The hardest part was lying to his mother about Sofia missing school. The hotel in San Antonio was luxurious, with stunning Mediterranean views that would have made it a perfect vacation under different circumstances. Sofia was thrilled with the infinity pool and sunset terrace. For her, it was an adventure, for Diego, a gilded cage. The first few days fell into a forced routine of normalcy, terrace breakfasts, trips to crystal-clear coves, visits to traditional villages. Sofia was happy, tanned, carefree, while Diego obsessively checked Spanish news for clues about Madrid. On the 4th day, everything changed. Diego was having coffee while Sofia played in the pool when he spotted a man in a dark suit talking to the front desk clerk. The man pointed in his direction, and adrenaline surged through Diego. He stood slowly, called Sofia calmly, and took her back to the room. He packed quickly, explaining they'd gotten a special invitation to visit another island. Despite Sofia's protests, she'd grown attached to the place. Diego insisted Mallorca would be even better. They slipped out the back of the hotel and took a taxi to the port. During the ride, Diego constantly checked the mirrors, no one seemed to be following. The ferry to Mallorca was crowded with tourists, making them harder to spot. Diego bought tickets in cash and chose seats in the middle of the crowd. In Mallorca, they found a small family-run hotel managed by Miguel and Carmen, an older couple with warm Mallorcan accents. Diego paid a week up front, saying they were tourists escaping family issues. True enough. That night, sitting on the little terrace while Sofia slept peacefully, his phone rang, an unknown number. The voice identified herself as Elena Ruiz. Diego jumped up and stepped outside so he wouldn't wake Sofia. The woman knew he was in the Balearics. She knew her father had forced him to leave Madrid, and she knew it wasn't fair. Elena explained the situation was more complicated than he'd been told. Those men in the restaurant weren't intimidating her because of her father, they were trying to kidnap her. She wasn't some spoiled mob boss's daughter. She was a prosecutor investigating a human trafficking network involving some of Spain's most powerful men, including someone who worked for her father. Diego felt the world spin. The night before, he'd saved a prosecutor from a kidnapping attempt. Now he and Sofia were in danger because someone assumed she'd shared confidential information with him. Elena proposed a meeting in Barcelona to hand over evidence that could bring down the entire network. Diego needed this nightmare to end so they could go home. After hanging up, he sat on the terrace for hours listening to the waves and staring at the stars Sofia loved. He had two choices: keep running, hoping the danger would fade, or face it head-on. The former soldier in him knew you can't run forever. Sooner or later, you have to fight. The meeting was set at a traditional café in Barcelona's Gothic quarter, mostly frequented by locals. Diego had left Sofia with Miguel and Carmen in Mallorca, claiming a work errand. The lie burned in his throat, but he couldn't put her in danger. Elena Ruiz was already seated when Diego arrived. Without the smudged makeup and terrified expression from the restaurant, she looked completely different, quietly authoritative, with sharp eyes that quickly assessed people and situations. She opened a leather briefcase and pulled out a thin file, explaining she was a prosecutor with the Seville anti-mafia unit. For 2 years, she'd been investigating a human trafficking ring operating between Spain, the Balkans, and the Middle East, moving billions of euros with ties to the highest levels. She showed surveillance photos, documents, faces Diego didn't recognize but that were clearly important. Her father, Victor Ruiz, wasn't the mob boss they'd made him out to be. He was a businessman who'd made the mistake of dealing with the wrong people. When he discovered his transport companies were being used for trafficking, he'd tried to pull out. 3 years earlier, during a tax evasion probe, Elena had stumbled on irregularities in accounts linked to the ring. As she dug deeper, she'd been followed and threatened. She'd learned that Ramon Vega, her father's right-hand man, was the real link to the criminal network. When Diego intervened at the restaurant, he'd foiled their plan to kidnap her before she could testify before an anti-mafia parliamentary commission. Vega's men had likely told her father that Diego had interfered in his affairs and needed to disappear for safety. Elena pulled out a USB drive containing 3 years of investigations, names, dates, recordings, money trails, enough to dismantle the network and jail 30 people, including Vega. But she didn't know who to trust within the system. She needed an outsider to get the evidence to the right people. Diego stared at the drive like it was a live grenade. He was just an engineer with a daughter to protect. But Elena had checked his background, former soldier with special operations training, and above all, the only person she knew wasn't corrupt. She said if he didn't help, Sofia would never be safe. Vega couldn't afford to leave them alive if they might know something. Sooner or later, they'd come looking again. Diego closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decisions he never wanted to make. When he opened them, he saw the same determination in Elena that he'd seen in his comrades before the most dangerous missions. He agreed to help. Elena smiled genuinely for the first time, picked up her phone, and called someone, saying it was time to move and that she'd found someone trustworthy. She hung up, looked Diego straight in the eye, welcomed him to the war, and hoped he still remembered how to fight. Elena's plan was as bold as it was dangerous. Instead of hiding, they'd return to Madrid and confront Vega and his network head-on. Not alone. Elena had contacts in an international task force that had been trying to dismantle Mediterranean trafficking rings for years. Diego flew back to Mallorca to pick up Sofia, claiming they'd been invited to a special party in Madrid. The girl was thrilled at the idea of going home, unaware her father was about to gamble everything in a desperate play. During the flight back, as Sofia slept, Diego reviewed every detail of the plan. Elena would contact her trusted allies in the prosecution service. He'd get Sofia to safety, then act as bait to draw Vega out. At Barajas arrivals, Inspector Marta Gonzalez was waiting, a woman in her 40s with short hair and sharp eyes. Diego instantly pegged as police, even in plain clothes. Sofia would go with her. Diego knelt in front of his confused, frightened daughter and explained that Marta was a friend and Sofia needed to stay with her for a few hours while he fixed something important. Despite her protests, Diego entrusted her to Marta, promising everything would be normal again soon. He hugged Sofia tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, as Marta assured him the girl would be fine. Watching the car drive away with Sofia, Diego felt the same ice-cold clarity he'd known on the most dangerous missions in Afghanistan, when you have nothing left to lose except what truly matters. Elena called to confirm everything was ready. It was time to let Vega know they were back. Diego took a taxi to his apartment in Chimbery, the familiar street, the building he'd lived in for 5 years. It all felt like another life. He opened the door and turned on the lights. Everything was as he'd left it, but he felt like a stranger in his own home. At 9 sharp, there was a knock. Diego opened the door to Ramon Vega, accompanied by the same young man from the week before. But Vega's demeanor was different, tenser, more aggressive. He walked in uninvited, eyes scanning the apartment as if searching for something. When he asked about Sofia, Diego said she was safe, far away. Vega sat on the couch like he owned the place. He explained that problems had arisen during Diego's absence. Someone was leaking confidential information to the prosecution, information that could destroy his business. Vega believed the woman from the restaurant had given Diego something, a drive, documents. When Diego denied it, Vega signaled his man to step closer menacingly. He said he admired movie-style heroism, but this wasn't Hollywood. If Diego had what they wanted, he should hand it over. If not, he should say where to find Elena Ruiz. Diego met Vega's gaze with the same cold stare he'd used on Taliban fighters in the Afghan mountains. Then he heard a familiar sound, tactical boots on the stairs. Elena hadn't come alone. Diego smiled for the first time in days and said it was too late for negotiations. The door burst open, and a riot team stormed the apartment. Vega and his man were on the floor in under 3 seconds, cuffed with textbook precision. Elena entered last, holding the USB drive, formally arresting Ramon Vega for criminal association, human trafficking, and attempted murder. As they dragged Vega away, he turned to Diego with pure hatred, threatening that it wasn't over, they had long memories. But Diego wasn't afraid. For the first time in days, he knew Sofia was safe, and they'd won. 6 months later, Diego and Sofia were having breakfast on the terrace of their new house in Alcalá de Henares, just outside Madrid. The trial against the trafficking network had made national headlines, but for security reasons, Diego's name was never revealed. Officially, he was just a cooperating witness. Sofia had adapted to the move with a child's resilience, especially when Diego explained the new house had a yard for playing and was closer to her dance school. She knew nothing about the criminal network or the danger they'd faced, and Diego hoped she never would. Sofia asked if Miss Elena was coming that day. Diego smiled. Elena had become a regular presence after the trial, first for legal and security reasons, but gradually the visits turned more personal. He'd noticed how Elena could share work stories that made Sofia laugh without ever revealing anything dark. It was a rare gift, protecting a child's innocence without lying. Elena arrived at noon on the dot, bringing flowers for Diego and colored pencils for Sofia. During lunch, as Sofia drew at the living room table, Diego and Elena talked on the terrace. In the months of hearings and security checks, they'd built a deep friendship rooted in mutual trust and shared experiences few others could understand. Elena said work was going better with Vega out of the picture, investigations stalled for years were finally moving forward. Diego's intervention had made a difference for far more people than he realized. He looked through the terrace door at Sofia. She was drawing what looked like a castle with 3 figures in front, a man, a woman, and a girl. Sometimes he wondered if he'd made the right call, getting involved and putting Sofia at risk. Elena followed his gaze and reassured him. He'd made the only right choice. If he hadn't stepped in at the restaurant, she'd be dead now, and Vega would still be destroying lives. If he hadn't agreed to help, he and Sofia would have spent their lives running. Sofia called them excitedly from the living room to see her drawing. They went inside and saw she'd captured their Alcala house with amazing detail. In front stood 3 figures holding hands. Sofia proudly explained it was them, their family. It was the first time she'd used that word for the 3 of them. In the months before, Elena had gradually become much more than a family friend. That night, after Sofia was asleep, Diego and Elena stayed on the terrace gazing at the stars. It was a perfect summer evening, warm air carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden. Elena mentioned what Sofia had said about family. Diego admitted he felt the same. In recent months, their looks had lingered longer, silences grown heavier, accidental touches more frequent. Elena smiled warmly and suggested they make official what Sofia already understood. Diego kissed her under the Alcala stars, feeling for the first time in years that the future wasn't something to fear, but something to build together. A year later, Sofia was the flower girl at Diego and Elena's wedding in Alcala's little church. During the ceremony, when the priest asked if anyone objected, Sofia raised her hand and loudly said she did, then added that she meant she said yes to the marriage. The whole church burst into laughter. On their wedding night, as Sofia slept in their new home as a family of 3, Diego looked at Elena and thought it had all started with one simple question: "Daddy, can we help her?" Sometimes a child's innocent words are enough to change the course of 3 lives and remind adults that doing the right thing, even when it's dangerous, always leads where you're meant to go. The most beautiful families are born when you least expect it, from the courage to do what's right.